Well, welcome back, everybody, to Hoops HD. It is middle or almost the end of July here. Complete off-season mode.
109 more
About
days.
9 more days, and they'll be August. I'm
No,
Chad Sherwood.
109, then it'll be
109
basketball.
more days, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm your host, Chad Sherwood. Two of our Hoops HD's regulars here, the puppet David Griggs and Joby Fortson, and a very special guest joining us tonight here, Ken Pomeroy, the owner and runner of probably the go-to metric out there for most people, the kenpom.com website, the KenPom ratings. Ken, first of all, thanks for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Looking forward to the conversation.
And
Yeah.
again, to get going here before we get into any of the details and the like here, just for people that are not familiar with you or your website, can you tell us a little bit about what it is and how you got going into it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it started, I don't know, probably 20-ish years ago. Um, just as like the Moneyball era was kind of coming into vogue in baseball. I was looking to do something along those lines for college basketball, and so I started my website and started cranking out some stats, and eventually it evolved to what it is today, which is just kind of a nice, handy reference for power ratings for all the teams in college basketball and various stats for those teams and the players on those teams. And now it has like other wacky stuff like officials ratings and home court
Yeah.
advantage ratings and things like that.
Well, but it's obviously more than that now. It has become a go-to rate to the point that your ratings are on the NCAA team sheets in the selection committee room, and uh, I kind of think from what I've understand, some of the way the net rating was done for the NCAA looked at the way you were doing some of your ratings. Although I don't know if they have any of your secret formulations or the like, uh, I mean, it's become huge out there for the diehard college basketball people, at
Yeah,
least.
yeah. The net ratings are, I don't think they use any of my code, but they are strikingly similar to my own ratings.
Yeah. It might not be the same code, but I think it's the same sort of philosophy of the way the net, I kind of try and explain it's a hybrid between a predictive metrics and a merit ranking. So
Yeah,
but really all it decides is how things get sorted on a page, is detailed as it is.
exactly. I think it definitely leans more towards the predictive side, because obviously my ratings are completely predictive.
Mhm.
There's no merit in my ratings, but yeah, I mean, it is, I think, generally designed to be an organizing tool, as opposed to, certainly they're not. I mean, we know from experience they're not going down the list from one to whatever and slotting at large teams and seeding that way. They do look at the quality of the resume, and the quality of the resume is based on the who you beat based on the net ratings.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you had Oh, so just real quick, like you mentioned the committee, has anybody on the committee reached out to you about your ratings? I know they all look at them. They actually do. I don't know you. That's probably not surprising to you. Have any reached out to you to ask for commentary or insight on what it is they're looking at?
No, I don't recall anybody doing that. Occasionally I'll bump into somebody on the committee during the season or whatever after the season, and we'll exchange thoughts, and they may have some questions or whatever. But yeah, I don't think I've heard from anybody like in the middle of the season, like, hey, why is this team ranked so low or whatever. Like, I don't seem to get questions like that.
Would you be able to even truly, I mean, to a degree, answer it beyond, well, their defense efficiency is low or something like that? Because obviously your formula, is created to find the most efficiencies offensively and defensively. It's not like it's readily explainable on a granular level, team A versus team B. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, whenever I do any media or whatever, and people are like, why is this team ranked so low or whatever, it's like, there's no like deep explanation for that. I mean, my system is essentially adjusted scoring margin, while accounting for the pace that teams play at. It's basically a per possession scoring margin model. So that's all it is. So it is kind of, it does make me chuckle when, every year this will happen. There'll be a few teams that people feel like are misrated, or they don't really understand my system, so they don't understand why they're rated where they are. and people will be like, Ken Palm's broken this year. It used to be a really good system, but it's like way off this year. And like, I mean, it's the same system. It's always
Magic, when
been,
their teams are lower, that's when it's broken. You do know that.
Yeah. It's like the system isn't any different than it was 10 years ago. So, there's no reason for it to be broken. There's always teams that people think are outliers, but yeah, it just comes down to scoring margin, adjusted for pace and adjusted obviously for, schedule strength and stuff like that.
But the point of your system really here is to say, hey, listen, this team is ranked higher in my system than others. Then on paper, on a neutral court, they should be the better team and should win more often than not. It's kind of predict what happens. You're not really looking at, gee, who did you beat in the past, and does that mean that you're a quality team? Am I correct on that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, especially early in the season, that comes into play. Some team will pull off a huge upset and they'll still be ranked, 50 spots below the team they just beat. And it's like, well, if they played again, who do you think would be favored? I'm not, like I said in the beginning, it sounds terrible, but there's like no merit in my system. I'm trying to predict the future. And we know from history, like, you just can't overreact to one game, especially when it's a really unexpected result. Upsets happen. And I mean, if Robert Morris, played
Kentucky.
Purdue again, like Purdue would still be a hefty favorite, it's like, that's just kind of the way it goes.
And on that, with the inputs, you mentioned the scoring margin. A lot of folks have said, well, it's now the scoring margin. We should now be trying to run up the score, quote unquote, in order to be good in not necessarily your metric, but how the net gets the focus on this particular way. Could you, for those out there, talk about I think there's a little bit of a diminishing returns on it in your system. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of diminishing returns in my system. I mean, again, it's, I look at history and try to calibrate my ratings based on that. And so you do find that like increasing scoring margin matters in a predictive sense. Teams that win by greater scoring margins do better going forward than teams that just kind of scrape by. The winning by 10 versus winning by 1 is definitely like more meaningful than winning by 50 versus winning by 40, right? So those extra points are not as meaningful, but they still do matter. And it does make me uncomfortable that like teams play to the rating system. I do think it's like harder to do that than you think because there's incentive for the losing team to also be playing hard. Like they should still be playing hard at the end as well. So, I don't think it's as big a factor as people make it out to be, but yeah, it still bothers me that that's the case. And I wish I had a nice, easy fix for it. I don't, but it's also kind of interesting to me. The net is like, doesn't even have diminishing returns as far as I know. Like those extra points matter just as much. Going from 48 to 50 at the end of the game matters just as much as if you go from 2 to 4. Like, so.
And you've noticed that just through your own observation. You think?
Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned earlier, like our systems are really similar, but when you look at like the differences, it usually comes down to like, there's it's that scoring margin thing. You look at the teams that have like just these outlier games where they win by 50 or whatever against an okay team, or even against a not okay team. Usually they end up ranked higher in the for the rest of the season they do in my system. Like the most obvious example to me is the game, I don't know when it was 2018 when Utah beat Mississippi Valley State by like 94 or something early in the season, and Utah beat Mississippi Valley State. Yeah, so Utah finished like 20 spots higher in the net than in my system at the end of the year, because my system was like, this result is absurd. You beat this team that you're way better than by a lot of points. Like, who cares? Like, that game got very little weighting in my system, and I assume the difference in our two ratings was almost solely that game.
Yeah, because I'm sure the net wasn't saying Mississippi Valley State was a top 200 team.
No, I mean, they were the worst team in college basketball. That was the whole thing. It's like, why are you rewarding Utah for this? I mean, it's not even about rewarding. Like, if it mattered, if that information was meaningful, then it should be in there. But history would say that beating the worst team in college basketball by 94, whether you beat them by 94 or 34, doesn't really give us any additional information in terms of how good they are.
Ken, you might get a kick out of this. Our website gives an award. We call it the Centenary Award, and named after Centenary, who has since transitioned down to D3 to the worst college basketball team every year in D1, and Mississippi Valley won it that year.
Yeah, that was a rough year for them.
Yeah.
One other question on the kind of the composition of the formula. Do you have, and linear is the wrong word, but at least a consistent formula where is there a flexion point in the formula when a win becomes a loss? I say this, like, first, the only difference in a game is a 1-point win happened because you made a basket versus a 1-point loss because you missed that same shot on the final possession. Yeah, is there a flexion point? Is it like, well, 1 versus the 1 is similar-ish, not identical, but similar-ish to the 1 versus 3? For instance, is there a break point on the actual win exchange, loss exchange point? I just didn't know.
Right. Yeah. There's nothing in the system regarding wins and losses. So it really comes down to, again, just scoring margin. Now, the way the system works, like the close games do get the most weight. And so those points around 0 do matter the most. But there's not a huge difference between winning by 1 and losing by 1 versus, winning by 3 and winning by 1. Like those 2 points are very slightly more valuable in the case where it's, determining the win and the loss, but it's not that big a deal. It's like, it's a minor factor, which bothers people. But again, there's like, I mean, I would love it if we had like good information to show that from a predictive standpoint, winning those clutch games really matters versus just the scoring margin. But when you look like I think the cleanest study I did was looking at conference play. So, looking at like the first half of conference play, looking at your scoring margin and looking at your winning percentage, and how does that predict how you do in the rest of conference play, right? Because like schedule strength then is kind of like really minimized in that case. And when you do that, you find that scoring margin is much more important than winning percentage. Winning percentage is not completely unimportant. It does matter a very small amount, but so small to almost be something you can, ignore in a rating system.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, Ken, that one of the numbers I looking at your website, and I get laughed at by some of these guys for looking at it, is your luck rating that you have for these teams, and I kind of look at that as if I'm right here, that's kind of the difference between how you actually performed versus how you should have performed. Is that kind of what it is in a way?
Sort of. Like, so people do misinterpret that to mean like how you should have performed based on my ratings, and it actually has nothing to do with my ratings.
Okay.
It's just how you should have performed based on the scoring margin in your games. What your winning percentage should have been based on the scoring margin in your games. So if you're winning a bunch of games by, 1 or 2 points, and you lost games by 36, like those losses should have been losses, right? Like there's no luck in those losses, but those wins, there's probably a little bit of luck. I mean, if we're being honest, I'm here for clutch performance and all that, but some, in close games, there's all sorts of things outside of team's control. And so that's what luck is trying to do, is just calculate, hey, what should your winning percentage have been based on the scoring margin in your games? And then what was it?
Is that an input into the formula in return, or is it just a reporting feature?
Yeah, it's not involved. It's not in the formula at all. And, frankly, I would have liked to have gotten rid of it if I could have.
I'll stop referencing it then.
Yeah, I mean, because it does, it's never received well by certain fan bases. It basically, it just identifies like which teams are probably overrated in the AP poll, right? Like, because teams when you're voting for teams in the AP poll, you're voting for teams that are winning games, and so teams that win a lot of close games are going to be ranked way higher in the AP poll than they are in my system. And so that's what luck kind of identifies. And I would get rid of it, but it's like, it does get a lot of attention, and people do like looking at it, or people like hating it or whatever. And so it's like, all right, it's been there for 20 years. I might as well just leave it.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting to look at, and it can help, in my opinion, because I know you say that there's no merit in your rankings, and I understand that, but when you are trying to measure merit, your rankings are still useful, because one of the things that I think the central question of the committee should be, and what I'm always asking myself and drilling into everybody else when we do to the mock committee, is how hard was it to win the games that you won, or to win the games that you played? And while your rankings don't measure that directly, they do indicate, when you look at a body of work, how hard it was for them to produce the record that they did. I don't know. I know that that's not what you're trying to measure, but I still think that when your rankings can be useful in that term. I thought I had a question, but that was just a statement, wasn't it?
Well, I will give now. This is David's favorite question. If you ever have watched our podcast, which I would definitely encourage you to do, we all have our little favorite things on the nitty gritty sheet. Yeah, there are things that, yeah, I'll be honest. My favorite thing is I want to see how'd you perform against other teams projected for the tournament. Yeah, that's just like an inherent thing I like. David's inherent thing, without a doubt, are road wins. That is without a doubt, it's a broken record. In yours, you mentioned the home court element. How could you walk through especially for David, who probably is very interested, what is the impact of that road home loss? In that question also is, different teams have different weights at home and loss given past performance, etc.
Right. So yeah, there's this is a little confusing, but I do have a home court rating for every team based on, again, research that I've done. It basically shows if you want to predict future home court advantage, like the most important things are basically like calls that a team gets at home. Elevation matters, pass scoring margin matters as well. But a lot of it is like just how many more fouls you get at home versus on the road, how many calls you get, basically. So that is how I do the home court ratings. However, in my own system, it's going to sound weird, but I actually don't use that in my system. I use a constant straight home court advantage number, which kind of leans towards like the power conferences. The power conferences tend to have more home court advantage. So the home court advantage I use, I believe it's 3.25 right now, 3.25 points, which is, I think in the power conferences, it's roughly 3.5. And like the lower conferences, it's like 2.5, something like that, 2 to 2.5. So it leans towards that. So that's just what goes into the system when I'm making predictions, or when I'm accounting for, like, hey, did you play on the road? Did you play at home? Like, we're going to adjust your efficiencies based on that. It's going to be using that 3.25 figure. I haven't converted the actual home court ratings over. It just feels like, again, it would result in very minor changes and
for a lot of work.
It's just a little simpler to explain, just saying, hey, I just have this, one flat value.
And that's extremely interesting. It is interesting because 3 points is often what folks in a particular desert town use. So it's
yeah.
Another element in your ratings that gets a lot of attention. And last time you were a guest, you did an excellent job of explaining it. But for those who didn't see your prior visit, is a lot of attention gets drawn to your preseason bias component. And you did an excellent job last time of explaining how it dissipates. Would you mind kind of going through that again for those who might not have heard it?
Right. So, we just got to start with the premise that I only care about making predictions. And so on day one of the season, how are you going to make predictions? Since we have no actual data from the season. So I do need some sort of starting point, and that's where the preseason ratings come into play. And, they look at basically the last 5 years of a team's performance, who's coming back, how important are those players, what transfers are coming in, what new recruits are coming in, and based on kind of history on how all those things matter, it creates a rating for the upcoming season. And people do get frustrated by the fact that rating stays in and has an impact, deep into the season. In fact, it basically almost at this point, it goes almost all the way like to the end of February, depending on the team and how many games the team has played. However, by the time you get to February, the weight of those ratings is pretty small. It's just a very minor factor, but it is there to give some additional stability. What's that?
Do you think the net, from your experience, do you think they have a preseason rating as well?
No, they do not. We know they do not. And that's why, when they release their ratings on whenever they do, second week of December, first week of December, whenever it is, they look a little weird early in the season. And
yeah. Do you have a theory as to why they don't do it from day one?
Yeah, it would be kind of fun if they did it from day one. You see all sorts of wild swings from day to day.
The reason
Wagner
is
beat San Diego State on just a random. Wagner's number one in the ratings. That'd be
yeah. Well, it's like any April batting average or any early season metric is going to be completely scattershot. And my theory, and I won't confirm or deny whether or not anybody at the NCAA has verified this, they just don't want to deal with all of the knuckleheadedness of people are like, hey, what the hell is wrong with these ratings? So they just wait. But the
Yeah,
committee gets them every day. They do from the first Tuesday of the season or whatever.
right, right. I mean, they still get some blowback when they're first released because there
Yeah.
are still like a lot of outliers, but I think people
Yeah.
understand that, those outliers will eventually fall into place. Or, I mean, what happens is usually is like, they do tend to converge onto my ratings, as the
Yeah.
year goes on, or any decent power rating. Just because most decent power ratings are going to include some sort of baseline to, make more realistic ratings and more realistic predictions early in the season.
And
Go
go ahead,
ahead.
Joey.
No, Chad, go ahead.
Yeah. Ken, I was just gonna say here that while your ratings show, predictively who should be the better team or not, uh, do you find that changes with the NCAA tournament? Because I've done some research into this. I've seen a lot of data saying that in terms of who's going to win the NCAA tournament, offensive efficiency is much more important than maybe even overall efficiency for a team. And I'll back that up even with just this past season, having read up on that. I went to your website right before the NCAA tournament, took a look at the top, I believe, 8 teams on adjusted offense by your ratings going in. Said of those 8, who's got the best defense? Because I got to throw a little defense in there. And the answer was the Yukon Huskies, and we kind of know what they did. And it kind of helped me with my predictions this year a lot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, in the tournament, yeah, I will acknowledge like the tournament probably is a little bit different than the regular season in terms of what gets valued. I don't think it's like tremendously different, but a little bit. And, yeah, offense does tend to matter a little bit more than defense. I mean, we should point out that like the team UConn played in the final was San Diego State, who, obviously is known for its defense, and that's how they got there. So,
Sure.
So defense still is important. But the reason, in nerdy terms, the reason that offense is more important is that there's more like range in offensive ability than there is in defensive ability. And so, the team's upside is often like defined by how good its offense can be, just because you can be the difference between the best offense in the country and like an average offense is greater than the difference between the best defense and an average defense. And you can see that too when you look at like the best teams in the country versus the worst teams in the country, like the really bad teams. We don't have to mention any names, but they're obviously bad at offense and defense, but some of them actually are like kind of okay at defense. Like they're not completely awful. Almost all of them are awful at offense, which I think makes sense too. Like offense just requires more skill. You can go out there and fake a good defense if you want. You can not go for offensive rebounds, and you can make sure you can take away transition from your opponent. You can't really fake good offense. Like you got to be skilled at offense, and so that's kind of the reason that offense ends up mattering more.
And we don't just mean flat points scored either, because there's some awful teams that love to that love to just run the ball and score like crazy. And those are not good teams, obviously.
Right, of course. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of flavors of good offense in college basketball, and some are fast paced and some are slow paced. But yeah, you can't really judge a team by its pace.
One thing that we hear often, we're in the preseason, so I see it on every message board now that schedules are starting to be released. I see it on every message board, the discussion of how can we schedule to maximize our, and it's not yours necessarily, but the net and others. What are there tricks that you see, and tricks is probably the wrong word, but are there strategies that can be employed, that can be deployed, that can, over time, assuming things work out, without craziness, you don't go all of a sudden, underperform greatly, that do help ratings, for a particular team?
Well, I mean, I'll just start by saying, like, I dream of a day where the selection process actually is it does not require you to like game a schedule. I mean, I think, on the one hand, like it's nice to see teams play tougher teams and like prove that they're good against the best teams in the country. But there's obviously like a whole ecosystem of teams in college basketball that really don't have access to those kind of games unless they want to, play those games on the road. So, you talk to like whoever it is on the coaching staff that's doing scheduling, pick whatever coaching staff you come across over the course of a year, and like you don't have to talk to them very long for them to complain about the scheduling process. Like, it's a mess, and they feel a lot of pressure to schedule certain teams. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying that in my system and the net, as far as I know, certainly in my system, the whole point of it is to like it accounts for schedule strength, but it doesn't, like, scheduling certain teams doesn't give you an advantage. If you schedule the best team in the country, if you play them well, you're going to be rewarded. If you schedule the worst team in the country, if you beat them by a lot, you'll be rewarded. You can also be penalized. If you play the worst team in the country and you beat them by a little, you will be penalized, even though you won the game. I think the only way you can really game the system potentially is to, you could play a bunch of weak teams and try to run up the score on them, and you might be able to game the system in some marginal way. I think that has like negative effects on preparing your team to be successful in conference play or in the NCAA tournament, if you're not facing decent competition. So there is that, but I don't think there's any way to like really set up a schedule in any meaningful way to game. Certainly my system, and I don't think really the net either.
If you schedule nobody's really doing this and once you hear what it is, you'll understand why. If you schedule like mid to low conference teams that win a lot of home games or anybody that wins a lot of home games, and you go there and blow them out, your net will go up. But anyway, that's easier said than done. And it requires going on the road. And as you mentioned, a lot of the power conference teams, especially if they're playing in like the big coliseums and arenas, they'll be contracted to play 18, 20 events a year there, which almost makes it impossible for them to go on the road.
Yeah. I mean, if you wonder why like Colgate has played at Syracuse for like 47 consecutive seasons, I mean, the one building is going to generate a lot more money than the other. And, Syracuse will share some of that money with Colgate appropriately, I guess. But, I mean, that's just the way the economics of the game works.
And we have seen, and it's good to hear that, because we have seen efforts. I mean, I'll call out the conferences because there's nothing wrong with it. You're trying to do the best for your conference. The Mountain West and the West Coast Conference beyond Gonzaga have definitely taken an element that where the ratings in the net and KenPom tend to not comport, so to speak, with that traditional ranking system and the seeding. The seeding often comes. I mean, St. Mary's would have been a 2 seed in the net, and I think we all would say, hey, no. But they were rewarded with a 5, rightfully so. So
it's July 20th, and Joby is still upset that Nevada was selected.
Hey, I'm more upset. I'm the Rutgers guy here that got my team bounced out.
The one who's. I had Nevada in my feed. I remember that. I didn't think it was the right call, but I had them in the right. I had them in the field. So.
Yeah, I think the committee has like generally gotten better ranking or seeding, teams like Gonzaga or St. Mary's or whomever. I mean, Boise State is like a good example of a team that like schedules a lot of decent teams. Like their schedule is just loaded with like decent teams. Like they're not necessarily chasing power conference teams that are going to look sexy, but they play a lot of like teams in the 50 to 125 range or whatever. And I think that helped last year. Like the committee respects that. So it's like kind of an example of like, you're not, to the extent you want to schedule, like you don't want to schedule to try to game the net. You want to schedule to try to game the committee. And if you schedule a bunch of teams outside the top 300, like the committee's just not going to pay attention to that, even if you're beating those teams by 50 points. Like you have to put some quality wins on the resume.
You have to put a lot of tier 2 in your, and then you've got to figure out, okay, who will be tier 2 in, et cetera. It's that whole puzzle, and you're exactly right. I've always found that the committee looks at what you've done, not necessarily your rating as much as the rating of your opponents and the quality of those opponents, typically.
Yep. That's what they value. Yeah.
And one other question that I find fascinating, especially with someone like yourself, who, is math, is formulas, et cetera. We're seeing a greater societal change right now that I think we're just seeing the very beginnings of an AI, an artificial intelligence. It's going to revolutionize healthcare and energy and all that stuff. Do you see, as a practitioner on algorithm side, not AI necessarily, not AI to my knowledge. But do you see AI coming in with bringing even more data than you could possibly, do on your own, and coming up with predictive metrics that could be used as a tool by you to refine, et cetera, not necessarily to replace, but to refine what KenPom does?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the future of AI holds for my work. I think the main thing, certainly the early stages of it affects like model development more than anything. Like it just helps. It's like instead of me having to like write a bunch of database queries or figure out how to structure database queries to do what I want, like, AI, I can just tell AI what to do and it'll speed up that process for me. I'm not sure that AI is going to offer like a lot of additional insight into predictive metrics or things like that. For one thing, it only can work with the data that we have available, which in college basketball is, not much. I mean, we got box score data and we got some play-by-play data, and we've had that for a few years now. And it's not like we have player tracking in every arena or things like that. Not that might even help us, but there's only so much data available. So I think there are limits on how it will help. And also I'd point out, like, there's limits on how well we can predict. Like there's just a certain inherent randomness in sports. And
Fairleigh Dickinson over Purdue may have been the most random.
Yeah.
Had your metrics predicted that, you would, is it safe to say that your metric would be very, very broken?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. Like there are certain, like, yeah, when people say, hey, your ranking couldn't have predicted that, like, yeah, absolutely right. And if your ranking did predict that, like it would be messed up. Like it would be something that we should probably throw out. And thanks for bringing up Fairleigh Dickinson. I don't know why I called them Robert Morris earlier in the podcast. But, shout out to Robert Morris for whatever.
Like I said, Kentucky,
they've moved to the Horizon League now.
Yeah, right. Robert Morris is in the Horizon League, and it's been 10 years since they beat Kentucky. So,
yeah, right. But they did. We all remember that one well. But Ken, going forward, in terms of the selection committee, do you feel they should be using your numbers? Do you feel they should be using the net? Do you say they should just be, picking teams at random, which they do sometimes, I think, but or should we have an AI replace them? I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, that's the other problem with AI is that it wouldn't be very transparent, and we kind of do want a transparent approach, I think. Yeah, I mean, I'm on record as being, really anti-selection committee. I think the committee we shouldn't have a group of people selecting teams and kind of, just basing selections on their opinions. Obviously, the selections are rooted in data, and that's great. I mean, I think the selection process is a lot better than it was, when we were using the RPI. But I do think we should be using a system where we know how hard it is for like a team on the bubble to beat a team of any ranking at any location. And so, you can easily create a system that evaluates teams based on that, just a wins above bubble approach. If you've heard of that, just basically, hey, how hard is it to beat the 10th ranked team on the road? Okay, you did that. Now you get rewarded by this many points system. There are a few details that work out in that, but it's totally doable and really should be the approach. I'm not aware of another sport, where there's a selection committee to determine. I mean, obviously there's different college sports that do this, but outside of U.S. college sports, are there selection committees out there that make decisions on another basketball league in the world? I mean, I don't think so. Everybody has kind of an objective system, as far as I know. There might be like an odd high school association out there that has a selection committee, but I think most of them have like these formulas that they use to kind of make schedule strength, kind of put everybody on the same plane based on their schedule strength. So I really think that's what we should be working towards, and it's totally doable if the NCAA wants to do it, but not to put my conspiracy hat on. But yeah,
I feel vindicated because I actually, as mentioned, that's on my favorite metrics. I actually the host formula for this website actually tries its best on, and one of the key components is that element for on predicting not what the predictive rating of a team is, but what they think the actual committee will do.
Yeah.
And so it's
we have a metric that predicts a committee. I don't know how that works. Joby,
I know you're not in love with KPI, but it was, because that's the goal, and that's not the goal of most metrics, though there are a few on Bracket Matrix where it has been number one 6 of the last 7 years.
One of the hurdles, Ken, that we're going to have to get over, and it's just the nature of college athletics in general. Every sport in all 3 divisions except for FBS football, which even they uses a committee. And while Division III water polo and women's soccer and Division I men's basketball are drastically different, the concept is the same. It's a committee. They're trying to pick half the field is conference champions roughly, and the other half is at larges, and they're trying to find the best ones that didn't win conference champions. And the reason they're not going to change that is because it involves changing the way they've always done it, and try and get them to ever do that.
Yeah, no question. I mean, the NCAA is a bureaucracy, and there's a lot of like administrative inertia in the system. Which is why I was impressed actually that they got away from the RPI. Like, I mean, to me,
I was too,
I know like the net has its flaws, the quad system has its flaws. We can criticize it day and night, and I'm here for that. But the fact that they were able to move on from the RPI was actually a pretty significant step for an organization where change is incredibly slow, and they're very slow to react to kind of realities of modern society.
Yes. To react to reality, and to acknowledge reality, and to live in actual reality. Yeah,
exactly.
Let's change the topic a little bit here. And I might be stealing Greg's one of your favorite topics here. Ken, when it comes to teams scheduling non-Division I opponents, and unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of schedules being released these days, and it's I think the one I just saw today was McNeese State, who scheduled 4 non-D1 opponents, including the Mississippi University for women. I mean,
who has a men's team? It's the men's team from the Mississippi University of Women.
But I mean, do you factor that in at all? Do you completely ignore those games? What do you do with a game like that?
Yeah, I mean, those games are
the way those
ignored completely. Just as the NCAA does. It's kind of bizarre, most of those games are exhibitions for the non-D1 team. So it's like, why? Like, it always it's amazing to me that the stats from those games are like included in official NCAA stats. It's absurd usually. Like the team, almost every Division I program realizes now. Like, there's no reason to play like the best team from D2. It's like, find the worst team you can find and play them.
That's the spirit. That's
Give your bench unit a chance to score, 15, 20 points and pad their average or whatever, and make your stats look good. The other thing that's hilarious is like, we'll be like 5 games into the season, and like, maybe McNeese State will be in a game on like CBS Sports Network or something, and they'll look at the averages and they'll be like, oh, but McNeese State has the best scoring offense in the country. They're averaging 132 points a game. And it's like, maybe look at who they played. Like, they played these non-D1s. Like, I don't think it really says much about how good McNeese State's offense is.
But what about, and we probably get 4 or 5 a year, I think, when the team does lose those games.
It's about it. 4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, do you even take a look at that and say, hey, this team needs to be rated lower somehow because they can't even beat, Carver Bible College or whoever they're playing?
Yeah, good old Carver College.
Carver, our favorite. We love Carver.
Yeah, they no longer exist, right? I think they're out of.
They exist. They're on the non-countable.
The non-countable. Yeah,
they're non-countable. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right though. Like, I should, if I was, doing my job, I should penalize those teams, those 4 or 5 teams that do lose those games. But ultimately, it's again just not worth it. Just not worth it.
The only time I'd say it worth it was Frank Haith's Tulsa team, when it actually was within range of the NIT and the NCAA after having.
Didn't they get an at-large bid with a non-D1 loss?
I actually think they did, and just if you have any curiosity, I merely substitute them. If there's 361 teams, I take them and reduce from 360, make them a new 362 for laziness. purposes, below on the raw ranking. Yeah, so that's at least how I've accomplished it.
I considered like running it. I guess it was, the 2021 when Carver played. They played like 21 games against
Yeah,
D1.
it was 20.
Yeah.
They almost played a full season that if they were D1, they would have been eligible for the postseason.
We
They
were
played
petitioning them
21.
for
I think they
postseason.
needed to be 27. Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted them to be postseason eligible. We were tracking their schedule that year on the website.
Yeah.
Even. That was fun.
I considered making a page for them, like just including them in the ratings and seeing what would happen, because I had all the player stats and stuff. It was, the stats were pretty atrocious. I didn't know if the players would appreciate that or not want to be identified. So I never pulled the trigger on that, but they were an interesting case.
God, yeah. We actually, we got really into Carver. We looked them up on Google Maps, and as best we can tell, there is a building and a shed, and that's the campus.
Yeah, I've gone through the same exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't expect this conversation to be all about Carver College, but so we take some turns. But Joby, anything else?
No, Ken, it's always an abs. Thank you for coming again. We very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Always great to chat hoops with you, and hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to this. I never have. As a fan, who's your school? Who do you root for?
I have degrees from Virginia Tech and Wyoming, and so
oh, okay.
Yeah, those are the teams I root for. They're not necessarily prolific basketball schools, but I'm loyal to them.
So you don't like the fact that Joby's there with his Virginia basketball shirt right now?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a problem there, but we'll let it
Well, as long as you take pace into account, we're okay. Just don't be a pacist. All right. So.
That's the funny thing, for years, like I thought, I was pretty flattering to Virginia basketball and their ratings and kind of shown some light on that. And then like the last year or two, my ratings have been down on them a little bit and down on the whole ACC. And I get this blowback from Virginia fans. And it's like, hey, what do you think I'm doing here, man? I spent like 10 years. My ratings are higher on Virginia than any other team. It's like, so
I am not one of those fans. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate everything you did.
Yes, Ken, thanks again for joining us. And I do want to thank everyone for joining us for the podcast tonight. Our very special guest, Ken Pomeroy. Make certain to go to kenpom.com. Subscribe to the site also. There's so much information there on every single team. And for David Griggs and Joby Force as well, I'm Chad Sherwood. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you again real soon.